Hi, it's day 3, unit 3, totalitarianism. Today's day 3, so we're going to talk about Stalinism. Stalin had his own special kind of communism, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Just a side note, if you missed day 2, that's because we did not do slides for that this year because of the SBAC. So if you're looking for day 2, it doesn't exist. All right, the overarching question for today: how did Stalin build a totalitarian state to control the people of the USSR? The first question is a totalitarian state. That means a state that controls people totally, controls all of their thoughts, all of their actions, controls everything. And usually there's a dictator, one person who is in charge. In this case, it's going to be Stalin, Joseph Stalin, and he's going to build this state to control everybody in the USSR, everybody in the Soviet Union. We're no longer going to talk about Russia. We're going to talk about the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or usually in English we say Soviet Union. Okay, so number one, what was happening in Russia before it was the Soviet Union? What was happening that made people listen to Lenin and then later Stalin? The first thing that's happening, you probably already know from our previous classes: poverty. Russia is an economic disaster. So Russian peasants like these, and these peasants are doing okay for themselves, but they are struggling. They're struggling with a life that is pretty much the same as it had been for hundreds of years. They're still living the life of the peasants of the Ancien Regime in France. They're still living the same life that peasants lived in the 1700s, except for that it's 1918. You can see in this picture the roof is in disrepair, and you can see also that they are drawing water from a well in 1918. This is pretty far away from the modern world. Also, the army was mad. The army was pissed. World War I, the Great War, ended up badly for them. The Tsar mismanaged the war, and the soldiers were mad. So what was happening? Poverty, mismanagement, a feeling that the government didn't know what they were doing. And so they got rid of the Tsar and Tsarina. This guy, Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, took control of the revolution. And here he is in this revolutionary painting leading the masses. And he was an academic, an intelligent man, and he felt that he could translate communism from Karl Marx into Russia specifically. And he had a whole academic theory for why this was going to work. His number 2 man is this guy, Leon Trotsky, and then Stalin, Joseph Stalin, was kind of sort of number 3. So how did Stalin go from being number 3 to being number 1? And why would people listen to him? People listened to Lenin because he was smart and educated and had good ideas. Stalin, not very educated, not many ideas, but people still listened to him. So what happened? How did we transition from Lenin to Stalin? Lenin had a stroke and died. Stalin was the party secretary, the Communist Party's secretary. He was in charge of all the paperwork. He did a tricky thing. Real Housewives level of drama here. He told Trotsky the funeral is on, I don't know, like say Thursday, but the funeral was actually on Wednesday. Trotsky missed Lenin's funeral. So at the funeral, Trotsky doesn't show up, and everyone feels like this is a big sign of disrespect. Stalin takes it upon himself to give this eulogy. Everyone says, wow, who's this guy Stalin? He's so great. He must be the next leader. And Stalin kind of takes power. He also uses his secret police people to kind of push Trotsky out of the way, and Trotsky ends up getting killed. It's a different story. Stalin also, though, has sort of a marketing stroke of genius. He changes his name from Yusuf Yugashvili, I can't ever remember even how to say it, to Stalin. And Stalin, or Stalin, it means man of steel. He literally named himself like Joseph the Iron Man. Like he named himself the name of a superhero. And so people felt like he was a strong leader. They felt like they could trust him. They felt like he was Lenin's friend, and he took power. Everything was still a mess, and people wanted someone strong to take control, and Stalin was their guy. So what did Stalin promise that appealed to people? Stalin made a lot of promises, and one of his big early promises was a 5-year plan related to this picture up here. This first early 5-year plan was to modernize Russia, to make Russia more modern. And that way our life will be better. You know, modern farms, tractors and trucks and baling machines and combines and all these things. And you can see in this poster, right, this person's crossed off. This person with a horse crossed off. Instead, tractors. This person with a little rake crossed off. Instead, baling machines. We're going to have a modern, amazing Russia. And how are we going to do this? We're going to do this by collectivizing the farms, by collecting all the farms together and making mega farms. For example, like you collect things. You collect a bunch of, I don't know, Pokemon cards and you put them all together. You've collected a collection. He's going to collect a collection of farms. And this collectivization was going to be a way to combine all the farms into large sort of mega collectives where everything would be more efficient. So instead of having little farms where everyone's growing different things, we have big giant farms where everybody shares and everybody works together. They share in the crops, and then we can use these big giant machines to go faster and be more efficient. This collectivization is a communal ownership of land and a communal ownership of the profits and the crops. So this is communism. And Stalin positions himself as the last in the line of the great communist thinkers. You can see here, you go from Karl Marx all the way through to Stalin. He's the modern version of communism, and he's going to take communism and he's going to customize it and make it Russian. He's going to make it Soviet. He's going to make it brand new Stalinism. He also promises people, sort of along with all this, the feeling of a romantic return to an imaginary past. So he's going to promise that the result of all this collectivization, it's modern and it's new, but it's also traditional. And the tradition is the return to these peasant villages where everyone cares about everyone and everyone knows your name and everybody loves you and takes care of each other. And when you don't have enough money, you can borrow money. And when you have extra, you can give some to your friend. It's a very idealistic, romantic thing. And the big selling point is this looks and feels very prosperous. You notice none of these are photos. These are all sort of propaganda drawings and paintings, because this is an imaginary utopia where there's plenty of food and plenty of money and everybody's going to just have a big party. I also love the detail on this piece of propaganda up here, where you might imagine there'd be the picture of a saint looking over this village festival. There's a picture of Stalin. So it's like he's literally the provider. He's the saint that people look to save them. So then the question is, how did Stalin use scapegoating to blame the problems of the USSR on some other group? Obviously, collectivization didn't work. It didn't work the way he promised. It didn't work the way he planned. Why? Well, a lot of reasons. 1, people didn't want to give up their own property. 2, the people put on the collective farms don't know what they're doing. 3, people don't want to work if they're not going to get paid. And they don't really like sharing. People are bad at being communist right away. One of the big problems is that people who don't want to give up their personal property to be collectivized, this group called the kulaks, kulak, there's part of their name. This group of people called the kulaks refused to give up their private property. They refused to give their farms up. They're slightly wealthier peasants, and Stalin blames them for the problems of the collective farms. He actually does a process called dekulakization to basically kill off all the kulaks. This was a targeted genocide of that population. And they were targeted by being sort of put under siege. So their villages were surrounded. They weren't allowed to go in or out. They weren't able to get supplies or food. No escape. All of the crops that they had were confiscated, and they were blamed for the failure of the other collective farms. This leads to just mass starvation and famine across huge parts of the Soviet Union. On the collective farms where the workers don't know what they're doing and are inexperienced, these farms fail in large numbers. The workers, you don't see any fancy tractors or trucks or combines or whatever. There isn't money for those fancy machines right away. So it's not the utopia that was promised. Instead, he created the what is called the Holodomor, which is a Ukrainian term for pretty much Holocaust. This was a Ukrainian Holocaust. This was a genocide. This was a famine that was created specifically by Stalin. And you can see in this newspaper from Chicago, 6 million perish in Soviet famine, peasants' crops seized, they and their animals starve. So what crops are produced are seized and brought to the cities, and the peasant farmers, the kulaks, and the Ukrainians generally die. Between 6 and 10 million people die in this Holodomor. That's happening in 1933. By the time we get to 1934, Stalin has shifted gears yet again to the Great Purge, and that's related to these 3 pictures over here. Stalin starts to try to find other people to blame for his failures. So the kulaks were to blame for the failure of the collective farms, and they're getting killed off. We also, though, need to blame someone else higher up. And so he decides to use sort of the same strategy that was used in the French Revolution, that the Jacobins and the Robespierre and all those people used, which is to say there must be traitors among us. There must be saboteurs trying to ruin everything. There must be spies, because if there weren't, this would all work. So this Great Purge, Stalin has a lot of people arrested. A lot of leaders from the Communist Party get arrested and put on trial. And in the trials, shockingly, they all admit to trying to ruin communism, for trying to ruin Stalinism, for trying to sabotage everything. They admit it. And so all of these trials become known as show trials, because they're filmed and they're shown all around the world, and they're shown at movie theaters, and they're shown in the U.S. And everyone's so impressed with how much everyone is obeying the law and order. The part that the show trials don't show is that behind the scenes, Stalin was threatening each of these individuals put on trial. If you don't confess, if you don't lie and falsely confess to the things you're being accused of, we will hurt your family. We will torture your family. We will arrest your family. Bad stuff will happen. But if you admit to being a bad guy, to being a traitor, then your family will be safe. And so pretty much all the people put on trial confess to crimes they did not commit in order to protect their family. Number 4, how did Stalin keep total control over the thoughts and actions of the people? So this is a little bit more tricky, and it kind of has 3 parts to it. So we'll start with the most interesting pictures first, censorship. Over here, we have this photo and this photo. Surprise, this guy is gone. We have this photo and this photo. Look at this. This guy, gone. So what's going on here? Censorship, you are probably familiar with from TV, movies, music, where like they censor out bad words, you know, da 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 beep, da 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 da. You know, there's a bad word there. They censored it out. Or people's faces are blurred on the news because we don't want to know who they were, or I don't know, stuff like that. Things that the government or that the news or that the publisher or somebody doesn't want you to see or hear can be censored. Stalin censored everything, all of the media, everything he could. And these pictures are a perfect example of censorship of the historical record. These photos are records of who was present at a particular moment, time, and place. And he's literally removing people from these primary source documents. So the evidence shows that this guy was here. The evidence now shows this guy was not here. He was literally photoshopped out, even though they didn't have computerized Photoshop back then. They would do it with a paintbrush and an actual airbrush. It was done by hand. You can tell here a little bit more clearly that this picture was doctored. It was changed a little bit, but this guy, gone from the picture, just gone. So not only could he make people disappear from real life, but he could make people disappear from history. And then those people just, it's as if they did not ever exist. Speaking of disappearing, the gulags. A gulag is a kind of labor camp It's a it's a labor camp. It's a concentration camp slash prison slash torture facility. Imagine some combination of Guantanamo Bay plus a concentration camp plus torture plus, I don't know. They're bad. At a gulag, if you are sent there, you do hard labor. You probably are tortured, and you're going to be re-educated. They're going to break down your brain and turn you into a better citizen of the Soviet Union. You could get sent to a gulag for very minor things up to very major things. The secret police had the NKVD had a quota of how many people they needed to arrest, and so they would just arrest people, and sometimes it was for very, very minor things. And then people would be sent to these gulags. Sometimes you can barely see this. This is Moscow here, but sometimes the gulags they were sent to were way over here in Siberia. There's no escape from them. I mean, even if you were to escape from one of these places in Siberia, it's surrounded by, polar bears and wolves and wild animals. So you're not going to get very far. People in the gulags were not treated well. They were all the standard things that we can think of, not fed well. They're reduced to eating worms and rotten fish and things like that to survive. People sent there for 5 years, 12 years, depends on how bad your crime was. And this is a photo of some people in a gulag. You can see their legs are chained together, and they do not look happy. The last way that Stalin kept control over the thoughts and actions of people was propaganda. These are two pieces of propaganda. I picked this one at the top because it is from Uzbekistan, and I figured they needed some representation. The guys in red in the middle are the good communist, Stalinist farm workers. You can see behind them in green the farm where the workers are working. And the guys in the black on the right are the bad guys. They're the lazy ones. They're kind of stealing things, shoving things under their coat. The guy in the back is smoking. And what it says in Uzbek is strengthen working discipline in collective farms. This was propaganda saying you should work hard for the sake of everyone. And if you're stealing, if you're being lazy, you're stealing from everyone. The last piece of propaganda is this woman surrounded by 10 children. And this was propaganda. I cropped out the words, but it's propaganda encouraging women to have as many children as possible to serve the Soviet Union. So women were encouraged to have a baby every year if you can, because the Soviet Union needs workers, citizens, later on soldiers. Okay, that's the end of day 3. What was happening in Russia that made people listen to Stalin? Why did people listen to Stalin? Why did they think he was a good leader? What did he promise that people wanted? What went wrong? And then why did he scapegoat certain groups to blame those things that went wrong? And then how did he keep total control once he got it? The overarching question, how did Stalin build a totalitarian state to control the people of the USSR? Summarize all those things together, and I will see you tomorrow for day 4.